Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the June 16th, 2022 meeting of the Portsmouth Planning Board. Our city manager is joining us by Zoom this evening. She's going to be attending with technological advancements. We have one other member not present for at least the first applications. Franco, would you like to sit for Ms. Magala?
Sure.
And we have approval of minutes to get sort of cleaned up that we haven't been able to tend to for a while. April minutes are still not ready for us to review. They'll be with us next week. There's been some technical difficulties. So I guess the first one we have is the May 19th regular meeting minutes. Anybody have any comments concerning those?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any discussion?
Chairman, just that I would have to abstain from these since I was not here for these meetings.
I understand.
Just let the record show. Thank you.
Thank you. No discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passed
Mr.
unanimous.
Chairman, I think we have to take roll call votes
Oh,
since
I'm
out.
sorry.
Right,
I'm
we
sorry. You're right.
We
You're
just
correct.
talked about that too.
I'm sorry.
We're so used to being on a roll.
Thank you for the reminder.
You're welcome.
Can you find it?
I had it a minute ago, 1 minute.
It's right there. It's on the
Oh,
back.
thank you.
I see it.
Okay. Planning Board Member Di Lorenzo?
He's not.
Oh. Is he
On the minutes. He's
Oh,
a
aye.
voting member.
Aye.
Planning Board Member Hewitt?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida?
Abstain.
He's abstaining.
Planning Board Member Clark?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard?
Yes.
Chairman Chelman?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mahana?
Yes.
And Planning Board Member Simonis? Are you-
Yes.
Are you, yes, okay.
I'm not voting, but yes.
You're not voting tonight? Is he sitting in for, no, you're sitting, okay.
Okay, next we have the March 30th minutes
And May 5th, special meeting minutes.
and May 5th special meeting.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion on those? Ready for roll call?
Planning Board Member Di Lorenzo?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hewitt?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida?
Abstained.
Planning Board Member Clark?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard?
Yes.
Chairman Chelman?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hana?
Yes.
All approved. A little feedback there. So we have the May 19th site walk. Not everyone tonight was present at that, but most of us were.
I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes from this site walk.
Second.
Ready for roll call?
Discussion.
Yes.
There's a typo. Last bullet point, solid waste. And then it's mentioned briefly that Attorney Sullivan provided an overview, but there was also significant dialogue with Attorney Sullivan regarding what we were allowed to speak about, what we were going to speak about, and that was a pretty lengthy part of the beginning of the process. And I think it should be in the minutes.
We actually, I looked at these minutes, and we had a planning director and I had a conversation about that. The important part of Attorney Sullivan's direction was that the board should not be deliberating on a site walk, and he went into some detail about why. I don't know that we need to say all of that detail. If you wish to propose an amendment to the minutes, I'm happy to entertain that.
I like the concept that he was directing what we were and were not supposed to be talking about.
That is what happened, yes.
May I make a comment?
Absolutely.
I think it felt more to me like he was telling us how we should take the information. Like this, we don't actually have an application in front of us. Therefore, we were just there to get the lay of the land so that when we had an application, we kind of understand fully what the property was and how everything was laid out. So I sort of saw that more as people asking questions for clarification as to what he was talking about, more than true dialogue. But that's just my opinion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I was confused also that day based on what Attorney Sullivan said and based on what was written on the handout. The handout mentioned eminent domain procedures and the jury standard. So I had a little issue with what was spoken versus what was handed out. That's my own comment.
Okay, well, in my experience of doing site walks and also looking at this a little bit with the New Hampshire Municipal Association, they are not that uncommon. I think it may be somewhat uncommon. It's certainly uncommon in the last year with this board, but it's basically just a public meeting to gather information. It is absolutely not permitted to deliberate while the board is on site. It's a public meeting. We did have a couple of people from the public show up at the end of the meeting, as you may recall, and they had just wanted to know what we're doing. That's all fine. I think I had some issues. It was difficult to hear everything Attorney Sullivan said because it was quite loud while we were out there on site. But from what I heard, I had, we could have gotten into a debate, a back and forth about things, but I think that the important point, and it's an absolutely correct point, is that the board should not be deliberating while they're on a site walk. And we didn't. The board didn't do any deliberation while we were there. Again, if one of them, you wish to propose an amendment to the minutes. Any further discussion? Ready for a roll call? We have a motion and a second to approve these minutes. Now the roll call vote.
Planning Board Member DiLorenzo.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hewitt.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard.
Abstain. I was not present for that meeting.
Chairman Chelman.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Rowe.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mahana.
Yes.
Those minutes are approved. We now have request of the North Church of Portsmouth as the owner for property located at 355 Spinney Road. We're looking for determination of completeness for preliminary and final subdivision approval.
I make a motion to vote to determine that the application is complete according to our subdivision regulations.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Planning Board Member DiLorenzo.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hewitt.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard.
Yes.
Chair Chelman.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mahana.
Yes.
And this is a point of clarification for the members of the public here, and this is not optional for us. We are required to have these roll call votes when one of our members is not present physically. So we're not trying to delay anything here. So next on the agenda, we have a request to postpone the request of Master Run Restaurants, Inc. as owner and Granite State Convenience applicant for property at 2255 Lafayette Road, where they will be requesting site plan review and conditional use approval for 19.40 under section 1044 to allow a drive-through facility. Property is shown on Assessor's Map 272 Lot 3 and lies within the Gateway Corridor District G1 District, and it's on Lot 2213. We have a motion to postpone consideration of this application.
Motion to postpone until June 23rd.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I'll just point out before we vote, the planning director and I did meet before this tonight to split the agenda because we were concerned initially that we needed to do so. Now a lot of stuff is getting pushed to next week, so we could be facing a pretty onerous burden next week. Just keep that in mind as we go ahead, so. We're ready for a roll call vote.
Planning Board Member DiRienzo,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hewitt,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard,
Yes.
Chair Chelman,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mahana.
Yes.
We have a request from the North Church of Portsmouth as owner for property at 355 Spinney Road, requesting preliminary and final subdivision approval to subdivide one lot, one existing lot with 146,666 square feet of lot area and 10,429 and 6,800 feet of frontage into two lots as follows. Proposed Lot 1 with 17,817 square feet of lot area and 117 and 6/10 feet of frontage. Proposed Lot 2 with 128,849 square feet of lot area and 360 and 6,200 feet of lot frontage. This property is located on the Assessor's Map 169, Lot 1, and lies within the Single Residence B District, LU 22-49. Who is here to speak to this application? Name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, my name is Liz Good, and I am representing North Church of Portsmouth tonight. I'm also a long-term member. Also with me is Nathan Amsden of H.H. Amsden and Sons Surveying, and he has been our surveyor on this process. We are seeking subdivision approval for 355 Spinney Road. It's a large lot, and it has two buildings currently on it, our parish house and our parsonage. The parsonage building was bequeathed to the church, I want to say in the 1970s, and it was merged, onto the bigger lot. So we've been at this for several years, and the church has been busy doing strategic planning and envisioning North Church's future. And so the membership recently voted to move all of our operations, our church operations, down to the downtown building, the church in Market Square at 2 Congress Street, and then to put the parish house building up for sale. But in order to do that, we want to retain the parsonage, because we use that for our ministers. And so that is why we are here tonight. We've been before the TAC committee. We've had one work session, and that was very helpful. They gave us a lot of recommendations. And then we have had 2 subsequent meetings with TAC where we have tweaked our plan, and we have incorporated the recommendations that they offered. And so we feel like we have the best plan possible. Some of that tweaking was making the parsonage lot larger. We had wanted to kind of stay around the 15,000 square lot minimum, but we decided to follow the stone wall as our left property line, and then we also extended the rear property line to encompass all the sewer mechanism that is back there. We also offered to do a dye test for the sewer running from the parish house property, and we did determine that was correctly marked on our plan, and it does discharge out at the bypass. So that's the plan before you, and we hope you will find it adequate. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Questions from the board? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Quick question. This might be better answered by Mr. Amsden, but The sewer shown going into the adjacent lot, are the easements all taken care of as far as with the abutters?
So the current easement applies to the lot. Of course, the lot now has changed shape, so a revised easement should be issued and reference the recorded plan, just showing that the lot has changed. The easement hasn't moved.
Okay, so the easement's already well in place and everything?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, but
fantastic.
I think it should be reissued, just to clarify.
Okay.
And reference the plan also for future reference, because nobody really knew where it was before.
Great, thank you.
And I would like to add that we did have some sewer issues a while back, and that whole line has been rebuilt.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions of the board? Yes, Jim.
Yes, I just have a more curiosity question. You said that at one point, the parsonage was merged with the main church lot in the 70s. So does that mean originally they were separate lots?
Well, that was a separate lot. It was owned by Annie McIntosh, who willed it to our church. But yes, there were other parcels on the, well, maybe you can, talk about the individual parcels.
There were actually 3 parcels, the parsonage itself, then the primary lot that had the parish house, and there was a small rectangle near the bridge. And so they were referenced in the deeds as parcels 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. And the parsonage hall itself was built in the early 60s?
Yeah.
The parish house?
Parish, I'm sorry, the parish, yeah.
Yes, early 1960s, I believe.
All right, yeah, and I'm just curious, that's all.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much. I'll open up the public hearing. Any members of the public present here or by Zoom who'd like to speak to, for, or against this application? Anybody on Zoom? There's 3 rounds of speaking, since nobody is showing their hands, nobody showing up on Zoom. Last call, anybody wish to speak to, for, or against this application? That was not a hand in the air. Well, you are allowed to speak during the public hearing, but Liz, yes, you. Okay. I'm going to close the public hearing. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we vote to approve preliminary and final subdivision as presented with the stipulations 1.1 through 1.4 in the planning staff memo.
Second.
Do you want to speak to your motion, Corey?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is almost as straightforward as we can get as far as subdivision plan, making sure also that the parsonage is going to meet the minimum lot zoning requirements and other items such as the easement, so.
Okay, any other comments? Guess we're ready for a roll call vote.
Planning Board Member DiLorenzo,
Aye.
Planning Board Member Hewitt,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark,
Yes,
Planning Board Member Conard,
Yes.
Chair Chelmer,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau,
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris,
Aye.
Planning Board Member Mahana.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. Application is approved. Thank you very much. We have another public hearing on the request of 404 Islington Street LLC as owner. Property at 404 Islington Street requesting a conditional use permit under section 10.1112.14 of the zoning ordinance to provide 10 parking spaces where 13 are required. The property is shown on Assessor's Map 145, Lot 33, and is located in the Historic District and Character District 4L2, CD 4L2, LU 22-74. I'll note that this is just a conditional use permit request, not a site plan. Who's here to speak for this application?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Attorney John Boson. I represent the applicant. The applicant's under contract to purchase 404 Islington Street, and with me tonight is Timothy Johnson. Tim is the owner of the company. We also have Sarah Howard from Market Square Architects and John Shagden from Ambit Engineering. We're here tonight requesting a conditional use permit under section 10.1112.14 of the zoning ordinance to provide 11 parking spaces for a 10-room inn where 13 spaces are required. The property currently operates as the Martin Hill Inn, which is a 7-unit inn and a caretaker suite. The applicant's proposing to renovate the interior structure by removing the caretaker suite and providing a total of 10 units, so there'll be no caretaker suite at the end. We'll be able to provide 11 on-site parking spaces where 13 are required. The project's been vetted by city staff as well as the technical advisory committee. We now seek a conditional use permit before this board. As a final step, the applicant will need a special exception from the zoning board because the use is changing ever so slightly from a bed and breakfast to an inn, and that application has been filed with the zoning board. So now turning to the criteria for the conditional use permit. Under section 10.1112.141, Ambit Engineering has provided a parking demand analysis, which has been reviewed by TAC. This report shows only a negligible increase in parking demand. It does not substantially alter the parking conditions in the neighborhood. Under section 10.1112.142, the applicant does believe there's sufficient on-site parking for its guests, but in the event additional parking is required, there is some parking along Islington Street as well as nearby downtown public and private parking lots, which does mitigate the need to provide 13 parking spaces. At the request of TAC, we did explore the opportunity for additional parking outlets for our guests, should there ever be a need for more than 11 spaces. And as you'll see in your packet, the owners of 54 Court Street have agreed to enter into a parking arrangement for overflow parking for up to 5 parking spaces if needed. I do want to stress that Mr. Johnson, who is in the hospitality business, does not actually see the potential for overflow parking because the inn has 10 rooms and it will have 11 parking spaces. But we have an overflow plan just in case. The inn plans to allocate 1 parking space for each unit, which Mr. Johnson would say is industry standard, meaning that guests typically arrive at an inn with 1 car. The owner is going to utilize an online advanced check-in system, so guests will know in advance that they can only arrive in 1 car, but if there is a need for more than 1 parking space per unit, we'll know in advance and we'll have the opportunity to implement the overflow parking on 54 Court. And lastly, under section 10.1112.143, we do believe on-site parking is adequate and appropriate for the proposed use of the property. In closing, this property has been a bed and breakfast for many years in its present location. There's no exterior renovations being changed. The interior room count is going from 7 to 10 units. We do believe there's sufficient parking. And also because it sits in the West End, there's a lot of transformation, as you know, going on in the West End, so there's a lot of walking and biking opportunities for our guests. So we don't see this as a type of inn where people are going to need their cars to go to the attractions that Portsmouth has to offer. That concludes the presentation. Myself and our team are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions of the board? Councilman Rowe.
How much, you say 10 rooms, but what is the occupancy of the room? Are they 2-person, 4-person, 6 people, 8 people?
I'm going to refer to Tim on that, if you don't mind. It's Tim Johnson.
How are you? There'll be dual occupancy, single bed, dual occupancy.
Okay, so no more than like 2 people per
Correct.
room. Great, thank you.
And just for the record, you're Tim Johnson of,
Yep, Tim Johnson of CSQ Realty.
thank you.
Pleasure.
Just Jim.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused about what's being asked because in our description from the planning department, you're asking for, you're proposing 10 parking spaces and you're showing 11 on the plans. So what's being asked?
We are showing 11, so we have, there are 10 now. We will have 11. and the ordinance requires 13.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So, one other, kind of another question. On parking spaces 9 and 10, closer to Islington Street, those weren't delineated as spaces. Are you confident that a standard Portsmouth space can fit in that area?
John, those ones. I might refer to John Shagnon from Ambit. Yeah, so there are 2 parking spaces. Those spaces have been in existence for many years. So they're pre-existing, non-conforming spaces, but they've been in use for as long as that inn has been there, which has been there for quite a long time. So it's our position, and I think we vetted this with TAC, that those are grandfathered spaces.
Well, grandfathered as in they're allowed, they may not meet the standards dimensionally? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they are existing, really the parking situation is existing conditions. So that inn has been there for many, many years. The existing parking, in particular, those two spaces have been in existence for many years. So we're not altering the exterior of the building or doing any alteration to those parking spaces.
Do you know what the dimensions are in those spaces?
John Shagnon from Ambit Engineering may be able to answer that.
Yeah, the spaces are, I believe there's about 20 feet between the buildings. And there is a photograph in your submitted material showing the space. It shows 1 car, but you can see there's plenty of room to park 2 there. I don't know if you want to.
If I could jump in here, I think, first is clarification, the request you're making tonight is for a conditional use permit for 11 spaces where 13 are required, is that correct?
That is correct.
The dimensional details of those spaces are the next step. That would come under site plan, which I assume if you get the special exception, you would be back to this board for site plan approval, is that correct?
I don't believe
No?
so.
No.
So, but you didn't ask for site plan approval?
So, I can speak to that. Yep. Site plan approval is not required in this instance because there is no expansion of the building, there is no creation of 5 or more parking spaces, nor is there creation of 800 or more square feet of impervious surface. So we don't meet any of the criteria that require site plan approval. We do need a conditional use permit for parking to change the use, which is why we're here.
That's good, but the dimensional relief that you can get is under site plan.
I would like to offer something here. It was the tax determination that these are essentially existing non-conforming spaces. As the use was expanding, we did ask for some improvements to be made. And they have notes on the proposed plan that shows the spaces are being restriped, straightened and lengthened to 18 feet. New pavement is being added next to space 1 and 11. Driveway would also receive more payment that result in widening, but none of these things would trigger site plan review. He is correct in his explanation of what is exempt from site plan review. We did not ask them to seek dimensional relief for the existing spots.
Okay, I think it may pertain to other aspects of the application. So, I'm fine with it, if you are.
Yep.
Jim, you have any
I'm all
other?
set. Yep.
Corey, you had a question?
Just real quick, so are these spaces going to be assigned for a particular unit? Like when you check in, and I'm in unit 5, I get
Yes.
space 5, and, okay. That's my only question. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. Do you have any history of the use of the parking with the 7 rooms that you've had on site?
So, Sarah, this caretaker cottage used the Union Street parking, is that correct? So the Union Street parking, the one that we talked about with the 2 spaces, that was used by the caretaker cottage. And so they lived there, a couple, they probably had 2 cars forever. And then the rest of the spaces were for their guests, and it's been operated for many years, I would have to say at least 30, and the history and what the TAC committee felt was appropriate is that it's operated and there hasn't been an issue for that length of time with those other spaces. Does that make sense, to answer your question?
Yeah, so obviously there hasn't been overflow going out beyond the,
Yeah, no neighborhood complaints, none of that. I think that's well thought of in the neighborhood, not as a nuisance, so on and so forth. And as the planning director said, the spaces work now and they're not even really delineated, so we're going to add that delineation and make it a lot clearer.
you're widening the driveway, the access drive to Union Street?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
I have a question for
Yes.
the planning department, or for Beverly, I guess. What do we know about and maybe nothing, but the history of any conditional use permits there's been a lot of development on Islington Street in the last couple of years with new housing and conversions. Have there been a lot of conditional use permits requested, do we know, or from?
Having been on here 6 months,
For
this is
parking, yeah, I know.
it's the first I've seen, but we could definitely do a deeper dive to understand how many parking CUPs we looked at. This is something we could look at.
I can probably answer that quicker, and not to my knowledge, like all of the residential units that have the little all have their own parking and enough parking. They didn't have any, so that's really the only major development that's in that area.
I'm just asking out of sensitivity and concern with parking becoming a pretty sensitive issue in town. It's further out, but it's kind of pushing out, so.
It's very close to my house, so I'm very sensitive to it.
We may or
happening
may
on all
not hear
sides.
something in the public hearing, too. Is the remote check-in a condition you're willing to make as a part of is that part of the application?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? I think that's it. Ready for the public hearing?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open the public hearing on this application. Is there anybody present or on Zoom who'd like to speak to, for, or against this application? Nobody on Zoom? Nobody present? One more call. I'm ready to close the hearing. I'm going to close the public hearing. Ready for board deliberation?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion we vote to find that the number of off-street parking spaces provided will be adequate and appropriate for the proposed use of the property, and to grant the conditional use permit as presented with the following stipulation 1.1 as shown in the planning board staff memo.
I'll
Second.
it. That was my night.
Sorry.
Do you want to discuss your motion, Corey?
Sure. Yeah, it's, parking obviously is a concern to everyone. I think in this case, 10 units, 11 spaces, I think it should work. It has worked at this particular location in the past, and I think having the spaces assigned to the guests and with remote check-in, it all should work. I haven't heard, I know this remote check-in is happening elsewhere in the city as well, as far as I know. We haven't heard any negative feedback to that effect, but yeah, so I think it's all set.
Councilor Morrell.
I'd just like to say that, especially with the occupancy of each of the rooms, in 10 rooms, you're very doubtfully not going to get people with more than one car, but if they do, they're going to probably most likely be in the same room, and one can drive one to the other parking lot to drop off one car and come back and park in that one. So I feel like it's appropriate based off of the actual occupancy of the rooms and the amount of spaces on site.
And if I can offer one comment about the stipulation, it's true as it's been operating that it could, based on how it's been operating, qualify as an inn, but we understood, and the applicant was very transparent about the fact that the owner did occupy prior to that, so we went ahead and made a call that this was a bed and breakfast, even though there was not a record of approval that this was a non-conforming use, and this, or actually it's a use that has a long-term use at the site. So to exercise a little bit of extra caution, we went ahead and asked that they go through the special exception process, to which they have agreed to and are going through that process now, to make sure that there is additional notification of surrounding property owners, and this is going through that additional process. So just wanted to offer that clarification, that there could have been an argument made that it was an in, it's an in now, and in may or may not have a caretaker unit in it, but we said, well, it looks more like a bed and breakfast to us, so we're going to require that you go through this extra process, and they were very transparent about it from the beginning. So.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Ready for a roll call?
Oops, sorry. Planning Board Member DiRienzo?
Aye.
Planning Board Member Hewitt?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard?
Yes.
Chair Chelman?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mahana?
Yes.
You can ask Mr. Simonis.
Planning Board Member Simonis?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I have city council referrals next on the agenda, is that
We have another
correct?
postponement.
Oh, we have another postponement.
445 Marcy.
I'm sorry, what was that?
445 Marcy is requested postponement.
I jumped over one. Sorry about that. We have a request to postpone the request of James and Gail Sanders as owners for property at 445 Marcy Street, which will be requesting preliminary final subdivision approval to subdivide one lot of 14,947 square feet. This is at map 101, lot 3. They have a request to postpone. Motion to that effect.
So moved.
Second? I'm asking for.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Ready for roll call?
Planning Board Member DiRienzo?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hewitt?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard?
Yes.
Chair Chelman?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mahana?
Yes.
And Planning Board Member Simonis?
Yes.
Matter is postponed until next week. We have the big night. Now we have city council referrals. First is the public hearing on the zoning amendments. We have a request to continue and postpone the public hearing until next week, June 23rd. Need a motion and a second for that.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we vote to postpone consideration of this item until June 23rd, 2022, planning board meeting.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Ready for roll call?
Planning Board Member DiRienzo?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hewitt?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard?
Yes.
Chair Chelman?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mahana?
Yes.
Planning Board Member Simonis?
Yes.
Thank you.
Now have a consider and report back to the council on how to improve the work of the Demolition Review Committee. Have members reviewed this report? Open it up for discussion.
I'll talk.
Okay. You're hiding behind the.
I was sticking my arm out.
You were looking the other way. She was pretty active, with, but quiet.
Quiet. Well, I'm trying not to be obnoxious like I usually am. I will speak about this because I was the chair of the Demolition Review Committee for every hearing that it's had since its implementation. Back in, was it March 2021, I went back and re-listened to the meeting, and to listen to all of the things that we talked about. And just to give you guys some sort of idea, because a lot of you are very new, this entire ordinance came about because we had a bunch of neighbors that were complaining and upset due to a house being torn down at a zoning board of adjustment meeting, but that really wasn't their purview. It was outside the HDC, so we had no mechanism for people to get public notice and to be heard for that reason.
Was that the Creek neighborhood?
Yes. It's exactly the one you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So this entire ordinance was then created around that. I will be upfront, unless something has changed in the last few years, and Attorney Sullivan can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is really no New Hampshire legislative backing or support for us creating this. So the honest answer is, if someone was to challenge something that we did under this, they'd most likely win. But so far, it has saved one property, and I feel like that has made it somewhat worthwhile, and that would be the Carey Cottage. We spent a lot of time talking about the Carey Cottage when people were going to tear it down, and we were able to have some pretty long, lengthy hearings and have a bunch of people be aware of what was going on, and they stepped up, and now it's a beautiful facility that nonprofits work out of. So I do feel like that was a win. So far, nobody's challenged it, and that's mostly because the end result of the Demolition Review Committee is you listen to people, you beg and plead and ask very nicely that people might, at least save some of the historic things about a building, but we can't stop them from demolishing it. We can make some requests, and we can certainly delay them, right? Right now, it's up to 90 days that we can delay them from actually demolishing it. There's some on the previous board that has been formed that wanted to get that up to 180 days. I'm kind of in the middle about it. I was probably one of the few that was not a preservationist as the person on the board, which has probably made me the mediator, not really the chair. So in the end, the ordinance probably could really use some cleaning up, because what brought about us needing some changes was that whether or not something is a partial demolition. So someone had come and requested a demolition. If you're only doing a portion of a building, they, don't necessarily meet the criteria to have to get noticed for, because what happens in the demolition review ordinance is we provide notice to say this is going to happen in so much time, and if anyone comes forward and says, no, I object, they don't even have to give a reason, they just object, we have a hearing. That's when the demolition review committee is actually gathered to have a hearing to hear out what the complaint is about. And then the delays sort of begin. So under that, we thought this person had a demolition permit to tear down part of it, but then got into it, and before we knew it, there was literally 4 boards sticking up out of the ground. There wasn't anything really there, right? It was all gone. At which point, there was nothing for us to save. And that was the discussion of that March meeting was, should these people be punished? How should we, and how do we change the ordinance to try to make sure partial demolition doesn't become full demolition without any notice to the public? Is that enough background?
Good background.
Yeah. Get an idea as to where all this came from now.
Good background.
That was very helpful.
Okay, good, I'm out of breath.
Do you want to speak about this?
Yes, the memo before you was prepared by Principal Planner Nick Cracknell, myself, and Trevor McCourt, who is our staff attorney. Trevor and also Shanti Wolf, who is our building official. What you have before you is the April 12th, 2021 Demolition Review Committee proposed revisions that they recommended and that were referred out to the Planning Board, Historic District Commission for review and a recommendation. We reviewed those and had some discussion. You can see the staff analysis that we put together to try some things for consideration. This includes, because the HDC is charged with historic preservation, that is their purview, within the historic district, the role of the DRC should be more narrowly defined as providing adequate notification, opportunity for discussion prior to demolition of older buildings outside the district. There is a mechanism to designate historic resources outside the historic district. If that is the course the city would like to take, it's the right tool for the right job is the Historic District Commission to preserve historic resources. But given the narrow and also the lack of statutory support, we took a look at that. State law does not empower local jurisdictions to prohibit demolition, as previously stated by Councilmember Moreau. Demolition outside the historic district. However, notice and delays are typical in most jurisdictions. The lack of direct statutory authority does invite challenges to a very broad expansion of the duties and powers of the DRC to stay demolitions. The intent of the recommendations above, because a couple staff members were involved in those discussions with the Demolition Review Committee, was to set the thresholds higher for demolitions, to saying these types of demolitions are going to trigger our review a little bit higher, but also to extend the length for public discussion so that so that during that period, folks can either get a documentary evidence of the historic or of the resource that may have personal or some other kind of value to folks, potentially extend the discussion with the developer or the person who's planning to demolish it, as was mentioned with Cary Cottage, that if you can keep talking, maybe you can get them to go a different way, come up with some solutions. And then thirdly, it could give an opportunity for somebody who's interested to acquire it for the purpose of restoration or some other purpose. So that was to extend that period allows those things to run their course. The staff recommendation would be that all the aforementioned recommendations should be, I think, referred back to the city council, but that there should be a detailed legal analysis so that we make sure that any of the amendments are in conformance with state law, case law, and best practices. The idea of incorporating into the building code, our building official said that's going to be problematic, and it was a very detailed discussion, but I think we'd want to just understand that fully. But definitely send those forward. And then, as we mentioned, at minimum, they should be migrated to the building code if possible. After a lengthy discussion among staff, and given the fact there is not a lot of statutory support or any, rather than extending the stay of demolition to 180 days, we thought about what the intent was, and it's to give opportunity for discussion, and that we think it's advisable to begin the 90-day demolition delay period from the date of the public hearing, and that not from the date of submittal, which doesn't give enough time to have a conversation with the developer, to potentially secure acquisition if somebody's looking to acquire it, or to get documentary evidences, which is what sometimes happens with properties that are listed on the National Trust. When they're slotted for demolition, then there's an opportunity for someone to go in and at least record what was there. And that's the minimum, but it is something that is even applies to properties that are listed on the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So, and as I mentioned, there is an avenue forward if we wanted to. I haven't looked at state law. I don't know if Councilor Moreau knows it, but how it is in New Hampshire, but in other states, if you would like to add protections to historic resources, you might conduct a community-wide survey, identify those resources, and through a local ordinance designate them as historic. So there's other ways. It's the right tool for that job if we choose to. But anyway, these are the staff recommendations. Send it forward with that. I think the only real stipulation we have in there is to make sure that it's vetted against detailed legal analysis, and then also maybe the 180s might be a little overreaching. We recommended to begin the 90-day delay period from the time of the public hearing.
So just for clarification, the request of this board would be to send it to legal department for final review and then on to council, assuming it passes with that.
I think that the way I understood it was that send it to council and say we think that all these should be done if possible. We should go ahead and do that. We had that one change that staff recommended, but that send the recommendation to council for directing staff to bring them back the changes. So I think, yeah.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Councilor Moreau.
I like the idea of not starting the 90 days until the first hearing, because one of our issues we always had was we don't know until somebody, I'm notified usually within, a day or two that an application would come in, but then we still have to find a time that every single one of us can get together, and sometimes that's 3 weeks away. And so you've lost 3 weeks before the conversation even starts, before you can. So I do agree that then there's less pressure on us to find a date that this room's free and you can actually have a hearing, which I've now learned as a counselor is really tough to find time when there's no meetings going on. So, having not, technically it's delaying the project, but at the same time, you start the 90 days once the conversation starts is a really good solution versus the 180 days.
Yes, Greg.
I also like when the clock starts. That was smart. I'm looking at the one thing here that seems to contradict, though, because if you go to the staff analysis number 4, the last sentence that would trigger review but provide a longer period, that seems to kind of go in the face of number 3 under recommendations, which says it really still is 90.
So it's 90 from the public hearing, and that's, I think.
Right, but
yeah.
I get that, absolutely, but the intent of the aforementioned recommendation was set a threshold higher that would trigger review but provide a longer period.
It technically is a longer period, because trust me, the
Well, I
discussion
get that. No,
starts.
It's the
absolutely.
first part. It's worded a little awkwardly.
It's worded awkward.
And
Thank you.
I think when we wrote it, we were all in the middle of the conversation, and I remember Trevor specifically, our Attorney McCourt specifically saying, the whole point was not to grab more buildings that would be considered as part of this. The point was to essentially create the longer waiting period. I'm not sure that any of these oh, you know what? I apologize. The first bullet, increase the current 50-year threshold to 75 years. That is the one that sets the threshold higher. So right now, the historic period is typically considered anything 50 years or older. That is, what the National Trust usually says, and that's
Okay.
what the Secretary of Interior says.
Okay.
But it's to push that to 75 years. So they're setting that threshold higher for what's grabbed, but delaying the period.
Right, right.
So that's kind of worded awkwardly. I read it in my office a few minutes ago, and I was like, wait, what does that mean? I had to think about
The
it.
intention is to have less houses that might get caught up in it.
Right. All right. There was one of, I thought I read something about penalties and things like that, and it was to what Councilor Moreau was talking about.
Yeah.
You ended up with one stick left. But look at, you guys looked at it from that point of view, but from a construction point of view, I was part of a renovation of a historic 1700s whaling house on the water in Edgartown Harbor. And we preserved it right down to the old windows. But when you got into it, it would have fallen down on its own.
Right.
And an inordinate amount of money was spent, and I don't think what happened was healthy because of the long arm of the law over the process. So I think you don't know what you're going to get into until you get into it.
Yeah, just for the record, our end result on that house was that they had already had their permit revoked from them. And so,
Okay, so
they
all right.
had to reapply their
Extenuating
things all
circumstances.
again.
All right.
And that's typically what would happen. So we're like, well, that kind of seems like a penalty all unto itself. Your building permit was revoked, and therefore you had to reapply for a new one.
Okay. All right.
So we didn't apply any more penalty other than what was already going to happen.
Gotcha. Okay.
We didn't waive any fees either.
All of my highlighting was for naught because it sounds better than it read. Thank you.
Andrew, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's since been answered, but kind of to what Greg had mentioned, just the efficiency of older housing stock and older buildings, which we have a lot of in Portsmouth, so it's a balancing act of really maintaining those, and I think the 75 years helps outside of the HCC, but also my forethought would be to say we want to improve the sustainability or building effort of newer homes. So if this developer applicant has a stated reason, like, oh, we are implementing X, Y, and Z of sustainable resources, renewable energy, et cetera, that would be an incentive. I think there was a word of incentivizing that. So I don't know if that's something you write in or if it's just that's the overall mission of it, to improve the efficiency of housing stock.
I'm trying to understand the recommendation. Are you saying that if they are proposing upgrading the historic structure to make it more energy efficient, that should be a consideration, or that if they're proposing to demolish with the purpose of erecting a new structure that is more energy efficient and a more sustainable building development, that should allow, keeping in mind that there's nothing within this ordinance that can prevent the demolition. There's nothing, they do not have the authority to prevent any or to prohibit. They can hold off, but they cannot prohibit a demolition. So the if that helps.
Yeah, no, that does.
And I could add to what exactly where he was going with that, and I've showed you right out your office window a house that I did on the water right across the pond. The thing about it was, we chose to keep it because of its location, because that had more value, and the configuration we did with it was really unique and turned out amazing. It just sold for $1 million too. But some of the things you can't do, you can't insulate to state or city standards in an old house because the structure isn't there. So you end up having to spray foam and having to make a deal with the building inspector for all the stuff that doesn't meet code. And that's when you start talking about stairways that aren't the right pitch. If I would have made that stairway the right pitch, it would have ended up in a neighbor's yard. It's just not possible. So you go down a path of, you can't save this thing because it's not a viable building. That's tricky as heck to work your way through. I like the fact that it really doesn't have any teeth. It's more of an incentive to take a hard look at this and do the best you can. And for that reason alone, I like that you didn't go to 180 days, because that's a financial burden on whoever the heck is involved. So the 90 is still good.
Can I make a comment?
Mr. Almeida.
I remember this discussion was had years ago to form this language in the zoning ordinance, and you mentioned the phrase "doesn't have any teeth." Is what frustrated me with it years ago, and it seemed like an unnecessary pain in the neck, really, for people who were trying to do the right thing, and that has always been my concern about the demolition committee. And I'm glad that we spoke a little bit longer about the 180 days, because that seems very excessive to me to delay a project that, I think there's a possibility of some very admirable projects getting caught into this delay unintentionally. But I do see that there is language and there's some exemptions that I hadn't seen until just now. So the third exemption down says minor demolition projects as determined by the code official. I can imagine that might be an area where an abutter or a member of or a resident or any member of the public, really, anyone can challenge that decision if there's an outbuilding or a garden feature that is historic that someone feels is contributing. But that's just the nature of this language. It is not in a heritage district. It's not. These properties are not in the historic district, so we are really treading on thin ice as far as enforceability of it goes. If someone shows us teeth.
I was honest.
So, yeah. But I understand that that this process has saved some very magnificent buildings, and for that alone, it makes it worth it. So,
Thank you. I did see your hand this time.
Yeah, I just want to add that as I heard everyone talking, it reminded me of the other point that I had a bit of frustration with this committee, because it does have 3 preservationists on it, is that they read into this ordinance, and I don't, but others do, that the neighbors or everyone has a say in what the future building might look like. And that, I think, we tread on a very thin line, and I just want to make sure that we don't put anything in the language that would make anyone think that, because there's already enough people who have that say. And that was the part of the one that got demolished without permission, so to speak. And I kept fighting it. I was like, no, the building's gone. There's nothing to preserve, and we're all about preserving something old. We don't have a right to tell people what their house can look like when they're not in the HDC. And I think we have to be very careful that this committee and this ordinance, that wasn't its purpose. It was about the demolishing of something historic, not what gets built in its place. So.
That was where I wanted to go.
Yeah, that was, I fought that on that committee with several people.
We didn't see the previous, but this looks fine.
I have a similar question to Mr. Almeida's. I'm curious, if we have no authority to do anything, how can the city delay an application?
How do we delay it?
Where's the authority to delay it?
Well, we don't have any, but we make people follow the ordinance. I mean, they could ignore it and.
Oh, so we suggest 90, but if you.
Oh, no, it's up to the committee can do 90. Yeah, by ordinance, if they're following the ordinance and they're making themselves subject to it, until somebody takes us to court, we have a right to tell them 90.
So if they get a quick court hearing, 90 days goes out the window.
Right.
Okay.
So that's why I think putting it to 180 would be challenged right away.
Okay.
They haven't challenged 90, and
So I think what you're saying is that at this point, it's valid, has not been challenged.
Correct.
And it's not inconsistent with what we see in some other jurisdictions. It's a very common thing to have, but it has not been challenged.
At least that's a good benchmark. We're not like blazing a trail here and making stuff up.
Kind of feels that way sometimes.
I think we somewhat are. Is there a process to follow the inventory that you mentioned to maybe create more of a? I mean, it does seem like it's Now, let me back up. I'm all for preservation very much, and history is very important part of this city. But I also like to see rules that make sense, and, you know, there's authority for those rules. If there's no authority for this rule, I might have a problem with it. So is there a way to give it authority, more authority?
Are you talking about the recommendations that we're thinking about, or are you talking about the existing ordinance, or just the whole concept of what we're doing with the demolition?
I guess it goes right to the heart of the existing ordinance. I mean, if the city has no authority to do anything, how can you then require an application that can impose a delay?
I mean, I certainly invite Bob to talk about this a little bit.
Attorney Sullivan might have to come
how we
up.
can expand what might be a challengeable ordinance. So, if Bob would like to address that.
He's probably said it to me before, but he says a lot of things.
Sorry to make you come down from the back.
I know.
It's all good, isn't it?
The authority question that the planning board has been discussing is a serious question, a genuine issue. It has been raised already at the city council level by Councilor Andrew Bagley, who has said that at such time as anything should come back to the city council following this, he's requesting a statement concerning authority from the legal department. The chairman has stated rather bluntly that if there is no authority, how can we do anything? And of course, if there is no authority, we couldn't do anything. We have not stated, however, at this point, in that blunt a fashion, that there is no authority. We have stated there is a question about authority, and it will have to be examined, and to some degree, whether sufficient authority exists to support what the city might want to do depends on what the city might want to do. So we're in a little bit of a chicken and egg situation at the moment, and my advice would be to proceed in order to make your recommendations, to proceed in the direction which you feel you would want to see the city go. And when it gets to the city council level, in accordance with the request of Councilor Bagley, we will provide the most complete statement of authority that we can at that time. And if we conclude at that time that there is no authority, we will conclude there can be no ordinance.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Mr. Chairman, can I just, of course.
Yes.
Attorney Sullivan, I'd like to utilize your extensive history in the city, if I may.
That's what it's going to be from here on out.
I've been here quite a bit of time too, and I seem to recall, Portsmouth used to have two historic districts, an A and a B. Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
And B, I remember, had different standards, but B covered most of the Creek neighborhood and a good part of the West End. Now, if this board is interested in increasing authority, would that option help it if they wanted to reactivate the historic B district?
Well, first off, let me say, I believe in general your recollection is correct. That's the way it was. I can't provide a lot of detail just from memory here now. I think that's the way it's going to be from here on out, too. And,
Don't recall.
But I think the answer is yes. That it might be that in searching for legal authority to take the action you want to do, the lesser the action you want to do, more likely there's going to be some authority. So if you had decreasing gradients of action that you could take to different locations, then I think that does lead to the possibility of, or more of a possibility of enough authority being located.
Great, thank you.
So if this board passes this recommendation on to council, it's not an endorsement per se by the board, it's a request that your department and your successors take a look at this, a hard look at this, and make a recommendation to council as you explained. Is that correct?
With regard to the policy determinations within the recommendations, the legal department would have little, if anything, to say about those. Those would be your policy recommendations. With regard to the authority question, the council is expecting a report.
Any other questions for Attorney Sullivan? Thank you very much, Bob. Well, what's the pleasure of the board? Folks understand what we've been asked to do? Did I confuse things too much?
Nope.
I make a motion that we vote to recommend that the city council consider implementing the recommendations of the DRC subject to a detailed legal analysis to ensure that the recommendations are in conformance with state law, case law, and best practices, with the following change: that rather than extending the stay of demolition to 180 days, it would be advisable to commence the 90-day demolition delay period from the date of the public hearing required under section 14.205. Additionally, expand notification procedures to abutters would serve the purpose of broadening public awareness, implementing demolition, and it would provide opportunity to affect community members to gain photographic records, influence the property owners, and consider the courses of action and consider alternative demolition. In addition, to add that the the age of the structures that are subject to the ordinance be increased to 75 years.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Would you like to discuss your motion, Counselor?
I don't know.
I'm just getting Apple notifications of some sort.
I don't have it.
I don't have
except for
Apple
this.
either.
Yeah, that-
Maybe I'll check my phone just in case. I don't have Apple either.
Well, it could be another device, I'm just suggesting, yeah.
Did you wish to explain?
I gotta say, sure. I thought we just had a lot of discussion on it,
We did.
but
We did. Well, just give me the opportunity.
yeah, no. I mean, I think that these are the best ways. I like the full legal analysis, and I think that these adjustments to the existing ordinance, and then at city council level, we can have a public hearing and we can really get the public's input. This is a city that really likes to have input in everything, and therefore this ordinance has been a way to give them input. And really, we haven't had a whole lot of pushback on it. I mean, we did lose the St. Patrick's School. That was one of the ones that was attempted to be saved. It's now a parking lot, but there was, trust me, on that side, it just, I love to say how it just depended on what side of the building you lived on. Because if you lived on the back side of the building, you were all for it being gone. If you lived on the front side of the building, you were all for it being saved. So everyone has a different opinion.
Thank you. Yes?
Just to speak to it just a tiny little bit more, I think the language has been tightened up. I think it's very good. I think my concern all along had always been that someone use this as a vehicle just to fight a project and not really consider the language. It was just a vehicle that potentially someone, it wouldn't even have to be in a butter. Again, it could be anyone. Wouldn't even have to be a resident. Could use this as a vehicle to fight a project and delay a project. And but this language improves it significantly, I think.
Anything else? I guess we need a roll call vote.
Yes.
Planning Board DiRienzo.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Hewitt.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Almeida.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Clark.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Conard.
Yes.
Chair Chalman.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Moreau.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Harris.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Mohana.
Yes.
Planning Board Member Smoes.
Yes.
It's been motion's been approved to send it on to council as in the motion. We have another city council request for a right-of-way easement to incorporate a section of proposed roadway in the city's existing Sagamore Grove right-of-way. Do you want to explain this a little bit?
So this was provided again by Attorney Trevor McCourt. I think the memo lays out the conditions for this amended easement. January 27th, Portsmouth Planning Board granted site plan approval to demolish an existing mixed-use structure and construct a 6-unit residential structure totaling 21,066 square feet. Subsequent to the approval, city staff identified that the existing Sagamore Grove right-of-way, as articulated in the easement deed, does not include approximately 124 square feet of new proposed roadway approved on January 27th. So the enclosed easement deed would incorporate this section of proposed roadway into the city's existing Sagamore Grove right-of-way. And then the drawing that is provided in your memo shows depicts the area to be added. And the consideration for the planning board is to review the draft easement, make a recommendation to city council. All easements that are not approved as part of a plan need to come before the planning board for a recommendation. So this is an amended easement that needs to come before you to go and to refer back to city council. The new easement accounts for the post-construction location of Sagamore Grove and establishes the new boundaries of the right-of-way. Adoption of this document will allow for the continued public access and city maintenance of the road.
Thank you. We have a motion.
I make a motion that the planning board recommend that the city council accept a right-of-way easement which should incorporate a section of the proposed roadway into the city's existing Sagamore Grove right-of-way.
Second.
Second.
Chair?
Looks like the right thing to do.
Yes, Mr. Hewitt.
Discussion. I just want to clarify in my mind what's going on here, that the applicant or the owner of the condos is giving up some of its property to Portsmouth because the road's already on their property?
Appears that way.
I
They're
just wanna-
extending the easement because the
Right.
easement area didn't go far enough to where the road went.
So Sagamore Grove pavement is on the condo's property, and we're just cleaning this up so that our town road is not on the private property any longer, correct?
Well, it's on private property, but we have proper easements
Right,
for
so,
it.
right, it's still on private property, but we have an easement to use it. Okay, that's,
Yeah, it actually benefits the city more.
It does.
It's taking liability away from the city because city road is on private land.
yep, that's clear to me now.
Any other discussion? Ready for roll call?
Planning board member DiRienzo.
Yes.
Planning board member Hewitt.
Yes.
Planning board member Almeida.
Yes.
Planning board member Clark.
Yes.
Planning board member Conard.
Yes.
Chair Chelman.
Yes.
Planning board member Moreau.
Yes.
Planning board member Harris.
Yes.
Planning board member Mahana.
Yes.
Planning board member Simonis.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. We have a similar request to accept the right-of-way easement on Albany Street, requested by the planning board in January 27, 2022, as a part of the project located at 89 Brewery Lane.
Make a motion to vote to recommend the city council accept a right-of-way easement located at Albany Street requested by the planning board on January 27, 2022 as part of the project located at 89 Brewery Lane.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just a question of the planning department. In the verbiage, it talked about a desire to have it go all the way down Brewery Lane, and this seems to go halfway.
They already
Make any
have an
sense?
easement for the rest.
Oh, okay. Great. So this completes it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
That wasn't clear. Thank you.
It was really part of a vote, and it was added, and then we didn't have the easement depicted, so this is bringing the easement and the depiction to the planning board to satisfy the planning board stipulation.
It's a cleanup.
Okay, it's a cleanup. They're both cleanups to a certain degree.
Okay.
Again, just another, so prior to this action, Albany was a private street? Okay, all right.
Chevrolet Ave technically is a private street too, for the most part.
We have a
There's
motion
easements on all of it.
and a
We
second.
talked about that at the last meeting because of that development.
Right.
Yep.
We ready for a vote on this? Roll call vote.
Planning board member DiRienzo.
Yes.
Planning board member Hewitt.
Yes.
Planning board member Almeida.
Yes.
Planning board member Clark.
Yes.
Planning board member Conard.
Yes.
Chair Chelman.
Yes.
Planning board member Moreau.
Yes.
Planning board member Harris.
Yes.
Planning board member Mahana.
Yes.
Planning board member Simonis.
Yes.
Motion carries. The next item, just requested a placeholder. You'll see this on meetings going forward, just in case there's something that's come across my desk in the course of meeting with staff and other things. And also, several of you take the opportunity to contact me between meetings, and that's fine. Some people don't want to speak up sometimes. I don't think two members here don't want to speak up, but it does happen on occasion. There has been discussions about other zoning amendments that I've heard from several members that some of you wish to talk about that aren't currently on the Land Use Committee's short-term radar, so to speak. Staff is fully committed and engaged, and there's very little staff support for anything beyond that, but we can still talk about those things. The planning board has the authority to talk about any zoning amendment and that sort of thing. I've had conversations with the city attorney about the planning board rules. I think there's some cleanup that should be done with the planning board's rules. Pretty simple stuff. Currently, the rules require things like, for example, adhering to Robert's rules, which we all think we know what they are, but there's actually several versions of them, and they can get rather onerous at times. I don't know that we need the full, I mean, it's literally a book this thick that I have sitting under my desk. So, little things like that. The wetlands buffer, I know we're going to have a conversation with Attorney Buckley. I'm not the only one that has it. About that.
Could you remind the planning board also of the date for that, because it is coming up, the
6/29.
So they were just reminding me to remind everybody else that we have a meeting with Attorney Buckley on the 29th, and he's bringing a woman, one of his colleagues, who I believe serves with him in the town they live in, to talk about the wetlands buffer and just how that works on a statewide level. There's been conversation at this board level about interpretation of that under our own ordinance. Does there need to be some modification to that? So I'm just throwing out some things that we can talk about. If anybody wants to talk about any of that tonight, you can do that now. But again, there's going to be a placeholder here so that I can raise some of these things. Also, one other thing I do recall, the capital improvement program came up with something that maybe we wanted to talk about occasionally, as we're required to on a regular basis, but perhaps a couple times a year, maybe we should touch base with it. So that was pretty much all I had. If anybody wants to jump on any of that or not.
So you're going to put this other business on every, I think it's a good idea, is
My intention is to have it every meeting,
Okay.
and it may be a 30-second conversation. It may be longer than that, depending on the pleasure of the board.
Or the hour.
And the hour. I'm sensitive to that. I am. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about any of these tonight, or just let you know that I'll be raising them.
And now there's a place for it. Yeah.
Yes.
Are you asking us if there's other things that we wanted, or are those things?
This is the opportunity if you want to bring something up now, but you don't have to. I just want to let you know that I am keeping track, or trying to keep track, of things that have come up. And Councilor Moore has her hand up.
I'll just give a quick update since we're all here and it's not midnight. The Land Use Committee has just finished up, I believe, today or yesterday. Yesterday with their focus groups for their questions regarding ADUs. I know at least the session I participated in went very well. I know we have two other members here who have participated in some sessions. And we actually have an intern now who's helping to start to work to do, because we're going out and sending all of our neighborhood questions to all of the abutters to every project that's been out, which is obviously a list of like hundreds of people. So we're going to try to gather some more written data as well to be able to bring back to the Land Use Committee and then submit to City Council and to this board to see the feedback that we got and the red line changes that we plan on making. So hopefully that'll be back in the next month or so, depending on how it goes. But I just wanted to give you an update that we are working on all that. There you go. That's it.
Thank you.
I don't think it's any surprise that my number one issue right now with the zoning is the parking regs. I think that affects us the most directly on a day-to-day, or in a case maybe a month to, every meeting. We potentially are going to have a project that's going to ask for off-street parking, and I think based on the experience at West End Yards, we need to recognize that and take action to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Well, the topic of parking, just to jump in on this, that is one of the things I get paid to do on a regular basis. I'm a fellow of the ITE and have written some recommended practices. I would be happy to go through that if the board wanted some background on some of that information. Like how we had tonight, we had the ITE trip generation, parking generation data presented. I'm not sure how many of you know what that actually is and how that data is best used and what its limitations are and what its benefits are. I could explain that if you're interested to hear that sort of thing. And that does lead into the parking discussion and then the regulatory aspect of it and how things are different in the downtown versus outside of downtown, or should be. So, I think, Peter, you had your hand up.
I mean, I think I share and feel and have experienced an ongoing concern from neighborhoods that border the downtown area of parking encroaching into neighborhoods by workers that come in. It has had an impact on neighborhoods where residents can't get parking in their own neighborhoods because of others pushing in to use the parking. And I do feel, as we look to take on things that increase density, that you can't just keep adding housing without changing parking to go along with it. And it's a big concern, and I hear a lot from residents, not in my neighborhood, but from other neighborhoods, and have seen it over the last 10 or so years, and it's a concern, and I think it's something we need to look at and proactively take action on if we can.
Yes, go ahead.
I'll speak from a person who actually lives in the neighborhood parking the NPP, Neighborhood Parking Permit Program. There's too many P's in that sentence.
The creek.
No, I live in Islington Creek. The creek's across the pond from me. So we I've been in that neighborhood since 2002, so 20 years. And we've always had a huge parking issue. And last August, we implemented the first pilot program for resident parking. And I think it's worked brilliantly. It's not been without its faults. It's currently been extended to Labor Day weekend. I have some suggestions of some possible changes we could do to it, but I think if people really pay attention, I think that could actually work in a lot of our neighborhoods, because what they're trying to do is to get free parking. And if, one of the things I would like to recommend to parking traffic safety, I haven't had a chance to do it yet, but it's on my radar to do, is to recommend that we actually do right now it's 2 free hours for anyone, or you have a parking permit. What if everyone that came to the neighborhood had to pay unless you had a parking permit? And then people who want free parking, and it would be just like the downtown with the app, the longer you stay, the more you pay. It's going to be a disincentive for them. They'd rather go park at the parking garage and pay. And honestly, the workers have really, the increase at the Foundry Garage has been greatly by the worker program for, I don't know, however many days a week, they can park 10 hours a day for $3. And that parking program has really helped alleviate some of the downtown workers searching for free parking in the neighborhood. So I think there's some programs that we're working on that are starting to alleviate some of that problem. But unfortunately, it's only in our one neighborhood because we were the only ones that fought for it for a very long time. And I would love to expand it to other neighborhoods. We tried to do it in 2 neighborhoods. The other neighborhood in the South End decided they didn't want to be part of the pilot program. But I think we need to talk about programs like that, because that helps alleviate for residents that don't have, I know several of my neighbors don't have off-street parking. So it does become an issue when you pay the taxes and you live in the neighborhood and you want to park in your street. So I am very sensitive to that. I don't know that, a huge change in our parking regulations isn't going to make an instant impact. I agree, outside of downtown needs more parking than inside of downtown, and you've got to have that mix. And I don't know what that answer is, but I believe there's some parking analysis going on right now that's going to help feed into any changes that might need to happen. But I think we need to look at all the options and not just our parking regulations.
So there's a parking RFP that is about to be issued. If it has not already been issued, I need to follow up with that from the Public Works Department, as part of that study, they'll be looking at maximizing utilization and optimizing pricing of city parking facilities, but they're also doing a scan of the regulations to understand how we can potentially improve our regulations. They are considering, of course, optimization of pricing, how you use pricing to drive parking demand, as you've just mentioned, and then how we can effectively use the permitting process programs like you've described. I would say that it probably will be very informative to take that information that is provided in that. They are considering things like parking-induced demand, that the more parking you essentially create, the more auto-oriented demand you're essentially fueling through your parking, and it's something to consider. The more parking you create, the more you're sort of incentivizing auto-oriented traffic in your community, and you're basically saying, let's all go to Portsmouth, we can park right in front of our restaurant out there, instead of saying, when you go to Portsmouth, you're prepared to walk. So there is a lot within that report, and I've asked that as soon as we are getting a little closer and have that scope finalized, that they come before this board and provide a report about what types of deliverables they're hoping to get from that, their timeline, and potentially even if they're far enough along in that RFP process, who they're working, what consultant they're going to work with. So they may want to also meet with this board or members of the board to get additional feedback as part of that exercise, and I certainly would encourage that, because I know we're sitting every day applying the regulations. There's two sides to that. There's the regulatory side, and then there is the optimization of city parking facilities, on-street parking, all the resource surface parking, everything that we have. I know in the jurisdiction that I was in before, those small tweaks about timing and metering can completely change the picture, because people really do respond to those changes in the parking fee structure. So all of that, I think I'm hearing you, because I've heard this a few times, and will continue to work with Public Works and ask at their earliest possible meeting if they could come talk to us about what is proposed, because I think the board is very eager to hear what the subject matter will be and the deliverables will be for that study. I also am, because I hear this from my planning board very often.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think I'm hearing two things, and you did touch on this a little bit, Beverly. There's the management issue of the parking that's available, both public and private, but there's also a supply question, and that ties directly into the regulations that this board has. I think it would be fantastic to see the actual data that the Public Works Department will be gathering with this report, and get that information in front of us. And it may be that the existing regulatory scheme is fine in certain parts of the city, but maybe it needs to be tuned in other parts, or maybe we need to make a recommendation to council for some more public parking. I don't know. These are options that might come as a result of us talking about it and recognizing it is a reality. To say Portsmouth should be car-free next week, I don't think is realistic. Ever. So, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that I thought what Beth mentioned about her neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods was very articulate and accurate. I think to what Jim was saying and what he has made at past, what comments he has made at past meetings about certain projects was also very articulate and accurate. For example, the West End Yards project, and I want to recognize that a lot of these parking concerns are pretty much in lockstep with a lot of Portsmouth's public initiatives, such as master plans and walkability and all of that, so multimodal transportation. So the intent is not to kick this can down the road, but just to acknowledge that as Portsmouth as a city becomes more comprehensive for walking and bicycling and all of that, these parking regulations in certain zones and projects could be amended or adjusted to what we have available for those other transportation options.
Everything evolves.
Thank you.
Things evolve, but you have to be careful that you promote that growth if you're trying to get growth. And I've looked at several cities in the United States where, the bones are good, but some of the management questions weren't dealt with very well, and things went south. The economy couldn't support the businesses, couldn't support what was actually desired to be happening. And parking is one element of that component. City of Santa Monica, which is just going always has been successful and is right near Los Angeles, so it's definitely a car culture, but Santa Monica less so than Los Angeles. The pedestrian mall there, which is one of the few in the country that actually works, the city owns all the parking garages around it, and they had to build a new one about 8 years ago because one of the existing garages was like 400 feet too far for people to use.
Oh, dear.
And this is a beachfront community, and right, just like 2 blocks off the beach. Wonderful climate. So, you know, the reality and the context is very much a part of how you have to look at the details and how things have to be addressed, so.
And that's only accentuated here in New Hampshire where we don't have Santa Monica weather.
Yeah. 3/4 of the year.
We may soon, but that's another conversation.
Hopefully not.
10 months of the year.
Well, today's a great example of that. When you're going through downtown, there are so many projects that the city's working on because
Right.
it's such a compressed schedule, so everyone feels it every year at this time.
Right.
You're turning left and right, roads are closed, and it's the way things have to be, unfortunately.
To a
And with
doctor's
the
appointment this morning.
work that's gonna happen on the parking garage, it just adds to it, so.
Yeah, I saw your comments, and they're well taken, because it's going to be a painful period in our near future here.
And a big contributor, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Is new construction that has occurred and permits that have been allowed to go under what we have, and our requirements, I think, are lower than if you compare them to other cities. So it's not it could be a new housing that was built or a new building, and those aren't supporting themselves, and I think that is enhancing the demand on streets and thus pushing further into neighborhoods. And in the South End, it's every morning I go out walking my dog and I see workers that come in and they park in the free parking areas, and I just happen to be walking downtown. I walk them into different office buildings, and it's tough, if you live in that neighborhood, to see that, because all of a sudden there's like all the parking's full on on certain streets, and that's houses don't have driveways; they have to use those street parking. So I think it's important that any new buildings that are going up don't fall under that minimum, and a conditional use permit. Tonight's example was very doable. It was unless all 10 of those guests are couples that are meeting and coming by 2 cars, which is so unlikely, that worked. But there's been others over the last 10, 15 years that have been approved, and we need to make sure we can sustain that for any new development. So have a high concern and recognize residents do as well.
Okay, I took the board probably longer than anybody wanted to with a nice evening out there, so.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Do we really need to do a roll call to adjourn?
No, you can just call adjournment.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.